Well, hello there, how is everyone? I hope you're all well. Guess what? That's right, baby. It's the midweek hump. The midweek hump. So, I don't know whether it's all now... Did they say it's all uphill from here or downhill from here? Whatever's easier, which I'm guessing is downhill. Yeah. So, yeah, we're over the hard part of the week. And you look amazing, by the way. Have I told you? Yeah, because you do. And we have got some meat and potatoes to get into, as there will be 2 videos today. This is video 1 of 2, unless you've... Depends on how and whether you've watched the other... There's 2 videos today. You know the drill. So first of all, we're going to be talking about Stevie G. Stevie the G-Man Gonsalves, as he makes a statement. He makes a statement about Howard Blum. Doesn't seem that they're friends, and doesn't seem that Stevie G wants to admit that he may have done something that could have potentially fucked up this entire case. And look, what I will say is this, while I just sort out this screen. What I will say is, I would have done exactly the same as Steve. 100%. I'd have likely been worse. I would imagine that throughout this process, I would have likely been arrested and faced charges myself. And that's just fact. So when I talk about this and moving forward throughout this video, please know that this doesn't come from a place where I think anything less of Steve Gonsalves. I think he's a fantastic guy, and he's a father, and he is doing, again, exactly what I would do, and probably being more reserved than I would. And you cannot blame him for anything that he does. You know, there is no rule book, there is no law book for how we deal with grief, and if you have not been in his position, and I know some of you have, you know, the people who have perhaps to a degree understand, but not only has he lost a child, but he has lost a child in this brutal fashion, and that is pretty much, in my opinion, and I'm sure many of you will agree, this is the worst situation that you could ever find yourself in, ever, absolutely ever. There is nothing worse. So we'll start there. But we do have to address the fact that Howard Blum released this article, and Stevie G has responded to said article. And he's responded in a manner which would make you believe that he is calling Howard Blum a liar. He is basically saying that this is a fictional piece. And ultimately, we don't know. At the end of the day, Howard Blum is a fictional writer. He is an investigative journalist. I'll get there in a minute. I struggle with words. English being my 3rd language. Not really, it's my 1st. You wouldn't believe it sometimes. But look, so you have to agree that there's a potential for at least embellishments, to over-dramatise certain elements of the story with which he is telling. But does that embellishment, does that over-dramatisation mean that what he's talking about is indeed false, is indeed a lie? And when we look at what Steve Gonsalves has said in the past, does it give you clues as to the fact that this is most likely a true account and not the lie with which Steve Gonsalves may want you to believe that it is? And let's make no bones about it, we can fully understand and appreciate why Steve Gonsalves may want this to now be seen as a lie. But sadly, I feel that that is like closing the stable door after the horse has bolted. Basically, you can't put toothpaste back in a tube once it's squeezed out. And that's what's happened with this article. It has squeezed out some toothpaste. There should be, I would hopefully hope that there will be some questions from law enforcement to Howard Blum at least. Now, I saw over on Jules of All Trades, Jules did briefly talk about the legalities of where journalists stand with when they publicise something like this, how much they would have to divulge to law enforcement. And I did a bit of homework on that, and it's not clear. It's not very clear, but it would seem to be that this, and this is what I read, it seems to be Clause 10 of the 1981 Contempt of Court Act says, no court may require a person to disclose, nor is any person guilty of contempt of court for refusing to disclose the source of information contained in a publication for which he is responsible, unless it be established to the satisfaction of the court that... and then you have to go to a different bit, that it would basically have a detrimental effect on the journey of somebody in that process. So if they could prove that Brian Kohberger could, let's say for argument's sake, lose his life, he could lose this court case and lose his life, and the information contained within this article could have a bearing on that, they could then force Howard Blum's hand. And I would say, and this is purely my opinion, I'm not a professional, I don't have any standing in law whatsoever, I would feel that this would be grounds where they could argue, and Taylor would certainly argue that fact. And I believe that that could then force Howard Blum's hand to give names of individuals that he is seemingly suggesting that he is talking to. So there you have it. I know it's not a definitive answer, but I do feel that it's pretty much a given. I think that is quite clear. Even though in this situation it doesn't give a 100% answer, I feel that it's 99% sure that they could, and Taylor, being as skilled as what she is in her field, she could argue that this is pertinent to the case. So look, I've written some notes here. And we're going to just address some little elements as we work our way through the Steve Gonsalves versus Howard Blum incident. And look, firstly, we've got to address the fact that Howard Blum didn't say that he spoke with Steve Gonsalves directly. In fact, in the opening few sentences of the article, he clearly states that he had tried to reach out, but through Steve Gonsalves' attorney, it was refused. Contact was refused, stating that they were under a gag order, and for that reason they would not be willing to have a discussion. It would seem that it's not so much that they're in a gag order, it's who they choose to go and have a conversation with, because it could be argued that Steve Gonsalves has put himself in the front of a camera when it has seemingly suited him to do so. But again, I would do the same. So that's not a criticism, that's just me stating a fact. Let's not forget that we do know Steve was doing his own investigation. He has alluded to the fact that he was doing his own investigation. He was looking into things himself, and that is something that Howard Blum does talk about. It was only about 3 weeks ago that Steve Gonsalves had said that there was information out there that people would not be ready to hear, that some people would deem as gross. So it's certainly pointing to the fact that Steve Gonsalves is out there, he is talking to people, he is finding information out that is not in the public eye, and you know, when you put all this together, it does lead you to believe that he is speaking to people who can get him this information. Now, is it just friends? Is it just people around the peripheral of this case and his daughter and the other victims? And I do say the other victims, and the reason I say that is because this isn't the Kaylee and Steve show. There is more victims and there are more families involved in this. Even, and I know this is going to be something that not everyone wants to hear, but Brian Kohberger's parents are still a family who are suffering because of this. You know, so when you hear the many people who turn around and say there are 4 families who have lost their child in this, there isn't. There's 5 families that have lost their child. Because at the end of the day, Brian Kohberger is someone's son. And it's not his... even if he did this crime, that's not on the parents. Some of you motherfuckers may want to push that, because we see it documented in films of fiction and non-fiction, and that's just the way things are, is that, you know, that parents are very much blamed for the actions of their children, and it's wrong. You know, the onus is on the individual who does the crime, and Brian Kohberger has also not been found guilty. Let's just remember that. But, so, is this, what have I put here? Now, does the lack of information actually prove that this is true? Now, Steve Gonsalves has constantly threatened that if his hand is forced, he will start to speak. He will start to speak out. So that, again, alludes to the fact that he must know specific things, or he has heard specific things that he feels would shock, potentially. There are things that he feels that he has knowledge of that would... that he doesn't want to say. Like, he'll turn around and say, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the person who does that. But if you force my hand, I will speak out. And you have to then question, what is he talking about? What is he threatening to come out and speak about? Now, is it that Steve Gonsalves knows, or he has been privy to information that would say that there's potentially other people involved in this case? Or is he simply saying that he knows that certain things were done wrong, or done illegally, done in a manner with which they shouldn't have been done? But he's certainly pushing the fact that he is privy to information that he feels that would be a threat to someone. He is using that for leverage. And, you know, that's what this article is saying. This is bringing out information. Could you imagine, like, when we just talk about, for instance, and I'm using this as an example, they are saying in this article about Dylan and Bethany speaking to each other via text during the crimes. Well, that could potentially be a situation that Steve Gonsalves could turn around and think that some people would find that gross. You know, I think to myself, when he said gross, I think to myself, what do you mean? That was a very strange terminology to use. But when you think about that situation, if you think to yourself, right, so if you imagine a situation where someone is going through this house and they were doing this grotesque act, and then you know that while this is happening, two of the people at the heart of it who was in the house, who have been deemed as victims themselves and lucky to escape, were actually texting one another while this was happening and having a conversation, especially if Steve is privy to what those conversations were. And again, I say, is the lack of information in this sometimes proof that it is indeed accurate? Because if this was indeed a post that was solely fiction, then Howard Blum could have filled in them gaps. He could have said what was in them texts, couldn't he? He could have gone further. His embellishments could have offered more, to give more of a dramatic, instead of giving you something but not giving you enough. Giving you enough that you know something's going on, like with there being a potential witness, for instance, but not being able to tell you who the name of that witness is. Anyway, I digress. But yes, that could be deemed as gross. I believe that some people could believe that Steve Gonsalves could have been alluding to the fact that he knew that during all the time that this was kicking off, that two of these people were texting one another. How many of you heard that yesterday, or heard that when this article came out, and that blew your mind? That was something that you would consider, that isn't right. This is horrendous. This is horrendous. How can you message one another but you can't reach out and obtain help and assistance? Especially when there's elements of this case, which I'm going to talk on in video 2 later, because I'm going to be talking about Ethan Chapin specifically, and what rarely sits uncomfortable with me. A lot of you have reached out to me via messages, via emails, and you are asking about a potential confrontation between Ethan and Brian. And I'm going to give you my thoughts on that while this laptop keeps trying to shut itself down. I killed another laptop, by the way, and I'm using some old one. Yes, so that's where we are. We're at a situation where Steve Gonsalves has alluded to the fact that he knows stuff, and he's trying to almost weaponize the knowledge that he has to say, look, do your job right, or I'm going to call you out on stuff, and I'm going to start telling people what I know. Like, there was an element when they talked about the Jack DeCure body search, like, so did that not happen then? Are we saying that didn't happen? Now, if it did happen, you then have to be of a mindset that, so someone must have told Howard Blum that that happened. And the only person who would have known that that happened would have been someone who Steve Gonsalves had indeed disclosed that information to. Now, would Steve Gonsalves have done this with Jack and then told everybody? Because it certainly weren't a post on Facebook, for instance. So I'm guessing that he had a conversation with somebody. Was it Jack himself? Did Jack speak to Howard Blum? We don't know. What have I put? I've put Steve G made statements early on that he felt people had been cleared too soon. Steve G still to this day continues to seem uncertain of Brian's guilt, or specifically this being a soul killer incident. And this tells me he does have reason to believe that he does have reason to believe this, or does he just think like I do? There are many that consider Brian a solitary mass murderer. One of them seemingly being Kaylee's mum, Christy. And is that because Steve is protecting her from what he has learned? Now, what was that little ramble all about? And what I'm saying is, for Steve to be in a position where he is unsure, uncertain, and feels that there could potentially be more going on, again alludes to the fact that he must know more information. Now, he may know stuff that he doesn't want to share with Christy at all because he is protecting her, like I would protect my partner. I would want her to not feel any more pain, not feel any more worry and concern. So if I learned that there was a potential that Brian Kohberger wasn't the person, if there was more people involved, that there was something that had been done inside that house that had escalated into this attack, and it was in fact Kaylee who was targeted, or this was a retribution situation, you know, off the back end of, and I'll say it, something like the Hannah Clary situation, and this was to do with that, I wouldn't tell her that. Because that doesn't help. It doesn't do anything. You know, I would want the system to play out and then deal with something when I have to deal with it. But I wouldn't be pushing worries and concerns like that onto my partner. So Christy may very well be in a situation where she feels Brian is the guy because she has been protected and certain things have been hidden from her. But anyway, is this article simply lies? Is this article fiction? I'm not so sure. I do feel that there is, because of who Howard Blum is and what he does, there is no doubt a way in which it's been written to offer up a more dramatised piece. You can see that, you can see it between the lines that has been done. When you talk about how somebody feels and what drives them, and you're putting that into the reader so they can feel it more. They can kind of get where someone's coming from. That's just what people do when they write articles like this, to make it more engaging. But when you strip everything back, when you take all that away and you just look at the facts, I say facts, just look at the pushed facts that Howard Blum is talking about. When you strip back all the noise, what is he telling us? He's telling us that Steve Gonsalves was a pissed off father who didn't trust law enforcement. And we see that. We see that. We've seen him firsthand saying it. We are hearing that there was a potential that he didn't trust Jack DeCure and wanted to do a physical search. And is that unreasonable? Steve Gonsalves said that he didn't trust people. He thought people had been cleared far too soon. Who had been cleared soon? There's only so many people who Steve even knew who had been cleared very, very early. And that would have been the surviving roommates and Jack and co. So again, I think that goes hand in hand with what the article is suggesting. Furthermore, he goes on to say that there's a potential witness who came forward. Now, is that out of the realms of possibility? No, it's not. It's absolutely not. And I believe that is very much likely what happened, because when you follow the train of how this worked out, we have always, people who have looked at everything, felt that the only way that we can be in the position that we're in now and seeing what we're seeing is if law enforcement were tipped off. They then had to build a case round someone that they'd been tipped off to. Not that they did an investigation that led them to this person and the background had already been done. This has always been about filling in the gaps. And again, this article shows you that, it points to that. What else does it say? It says that Steve Gonsalves has got communication between potential grand jurors, 2 grand jurors. Is that possible? Is it possible? The reason why I feel it's possible is that Howard Blum turned around and said he is not wanting to have to go into a public debate with Steve Gonsalves. This father has been through enough. That's enough to say, look, it is what it is. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to call you a liar because that would be disrespectful. I'm just going to leave it there. You've got your opinion, whatever. Have your opinion. That would be damage limitation. Steve Gonsalves is like a bull in a china shop, and I would be exactly the same. And I believe that one single piece of information, Steve Gonsalves knows that is the bit that causes concern. And by coming out and saying this is clearly a fictional piece, that is to try and distance himself from a potential mistake. And that one piece of information is all of this is about. All Steve is coming out. It's not about anything else. It's about that. It's about that statement. About having a conduit to the grand jurors. Because that's the bit that causes a huge problem. And now, it's now about rolling the dice and seeing where we end up. Because if law enforcement get hold of this, which they're gonna, Ann Taylor, at the very least, Ann Taylor is going to have a field day with this. She's going to be like a dog with a bone. You heard it here first. Well, maybe not first, but you heard it here. And because I say you're amazing, and you are amazing, you can forget if you heard it anywhere else and just pretend that you heard it here first. Because that then makes me amazing. And we've got like this bond between us. Anyway, that was video 1. Let me know down below what you think. Full of shit. Truth to it, some lies, some embellishments, whatever. What do you think? Is this just about damage limitation, distancing himself from a fuck up? I'll catch you all in video 2 later today.